Hi, this is Farai, Zimbabwe Monetary Institute. Today we're going to talk about real money, and that it is not backed by anything. We have debate that I've seen in the newspapers, and they've been saying there's no modern currency that's backed by anything. They say that that if they're going to bring back the Zimbabwe dollar, they need to back it with gold or gold reserves, and this is total rubbish. Real money, no modern money is backed by anything. Um, Real money is full and final settlement of debt of debts, both public and private. It's based on the faith and credit on the government. Um, there is no need to back any money with anything, and this hasn't been talked about in over 50 years since Bretton Woods, and we know that Bretton Woods itself was a sham because when push came to shove, the Americans didn't honor their commitment that every dollar they would spend would be based on gold. And this is basically back to the gold standard, which has been discredited and it's not used anyway. And these bankers caused the hyperinflation. They destroyed the currency. They destroyed it from within, because you can only destroy a currency either from the Reserve Bank or from a commercial bank, because they're the ones that provide the bulk of the money in an economy. And this is very important when you look at money, that you don't let reason cloud what you're doing. You must look at history. You must go into monetary history. You must go into economic history and see what happened in the past when different things were led. And Alexander Delmar was the best monetary historian, according to a lot of accounts. He says, as a rule, economists do not take the trouble to study the history of money. It is much easier to imagine and to deduce the principles from this imaginary knowledge. For example, we get a guy called Ludwig von Mises, who's from the Austrian School of Economics. And then he's got a book called The Theory of Money and Credit, which is basically a Bible of the libertarians, of the guys who hail from the Mises Institute, which is at Auburn University in Alabama. They say the proof of a theory is in its reasoning. And and they don't care whether it explains anything that's happening in reality or not. It is so as long as the reasoning is right, it doesn't matter whether it's real or it's beneficial or it's good. They just look at the reasoning. If the reasoning is good, then they say, voila, this is good. But if we look at the word theoria, the word theory, the theory means a look in. Theory and practice should never be different. If theory and practice are different, then there's something wrong with your theory. The practice is what it is. The reality is what it is. What you're trying to do is to describe what really happens in real life, and not a reality that you presume. As they say in economics, that it's made out of axioms, things that are apparent, that don't need any proof. And as long as you apply these axioms consistently, these axioms don't have to be true. They call them the self-evident truths. They're things that are self-evident. And they don't say that these axioms need to be true. And so economics can go further and further from reality. And one of the most important axioms is they assume that government is just a mere user of the currency. But this is wrong. Government is not just a user of the currency, it is a provider of the currency. 99% of economic models do not have government unless the government's collecting taxes. And they have no money except prices that move up or down. These axioms do not, and these models do not portray reality. And what we need is to be real. So once you go and say that money must be backed by anything, you are reverting back to barter. You are not overcoming the limit of barter. The limit of barter is the main distinguishing mark between barter and money. Barter had a Latin word used with the ancients, and was called ponderata, which is money by weight. In other words, if you're taking the value or the weight of a commodity and you're using that as your money, you are in barter. And money is anything that overcomes the limits of barter. We go back to our graph. We have money on the y-axis, time on the x-axis, and what you have here are the cash inflows coming into a government, or the taxes if there's no loans. So this is total cash inflows, and so what we say is the line there of cash inflows is the line of barter. In barter, you cannot overcome that line. You cannot go over that line. You can never spend more than you make in taxes, more than the cash inflows that you make. But once you go into money, you can create either by journal entry or by printing money much more than you make in taxes, and you can actually spend this money first before you receive it in taxes. So that's the line of barter. In barter, you cannot overcome that line. You only overcome that line with moneta. So money was created so government can spend more than it receives in taxes and before it receives the money in taxes. So here we look at barter. The economy generates whatever it is, the goods, whether it's gold or whatever. So government has to wait to receive the currency from the economy, or even from the diaspora, or from cash inflows, or from the IMF, or from loans. And most of it is through taxes. The government then collects these taxes, and then it spends that money into the economy. So government spending is constrained by its receipts in barter, but under money it is not constrained by taxes. Government must spend first. Government must go out and spend that money into existence first before it can be taxed. We say that when government spends the money, it's the birth of money. And when it is taxes, when it taxes the money and it receives that money dies. That money returns to its creator. It is a finance drain on the economy. That's what taxes are. When a bank lends, that money is brought into existence. It lends money that has not existed before. We talk about this on the second video on bank creation. And that's the death of, and that is the birth of money. And when the loans are repaid, we call that the death of money. That money is removed from the real economy. The real economy does not have banks in its model. So you have people who go out and say, I promise to pay the bearer on demand. That's what money is. Money is gold. That's why that remark is. And this thing is a relic of the gold standard. And they haven't removed it because it confuses the people. If you go to the Bank of England and you give them a pound note, they'll give you back another pound note. And always the gold standard was a pretense. The gold was never there. but to back up all the notes. But they pretended that it was. And whenever they had a crisis, or like when Napoleon appeared in France in the late 1790s, in 1797 they went off the gold standard and only reverted to it 24 years later in 1821. So you can see that whenever there's a panic or a war or any circumstances that might lead to a panic, they always suspended the what they call specie payments. They were no longer giving gold for this. And also, you must know that it was always that they would give the gold standard would be there as long as not a lot of people claimed the money. We must know that this gold standard is much more evil and much more harmful than you can imagine. Because in America they had a monetary commission in 1876. Alexander Delmar was the main commissioner, and they basically said that the Dark Ages was caused by the whole world reverting to gold. That's why you had the Dark Ages. That's why you had the medieval times. A lot of knowledge was lost in the medieval times. Even the making of cement was lost among the people during the medieval times, because everybody resorted to gold and there was not enough currency floating in the economy. And when you read the background to John Maynard Keynes and the reason that he wrote the general theory of employment, interest, and money, was that he was afraid that the Great Depression could have easily led to a second Dark Age. Because in 1930, just before the Depression, he had released a book called The Treatise on Money. I think it's in two parts. There's a pure part of it and the applied part of it in the second. And he thought it's not a bad treatise. I mean, it's just the language that he uses is pretty difficult, but it's a better book than most economic books. But he felt that he hadn't done enough, and that there was always the danger that the world could fall into another Dark Age because of things like a gold standard coming back, because the bankers loved the gold standard, and England loved the gold standard because it made sure that all the other countries were on to barter, and that is the way it can plunder its colonies. So we know that Bretton Woods was the last time any of the countries pretended they were in gold. America pretended it was on gold, but the gold window was shut on Sunday, 15 August 1971, by Nixon. But this was always the intention of the Americans, because they wanted to place their currency on top of the world. Because when gold was on top of the pyramid of currencies, and this was then replaced by the US dollar, and this gave them world domination. So Bretton Woods didn't work. Now the bankers are calling in Zimbabwe that the money be backed by gold reserves, because the bankers are saying that there will be hyperinflation. And you can read this week in, week out in the Sunday Mail. And I used to think it's a pro-government paper, but it's really a pro-banker newspaper. In fact, all the newspapers, even Daily News, talk about fear of hyperinflation anytime a return of a currency is used. But none of these papers ever expose that the bankers caused the hyperinflation. And I know that they know that that the bankers caused the hyperinflation. So let's just quickly look at bank creation, because it's the heart of understanding what these people are trying to do. It's by accounting privilege and banking custom. In 2014, the Bank of England came out and said that banks created 97% of the money they use in the UK. The government only created 3%. You can look at the Positive Money website. They go ad nauseum about this. I also did a video on it, the second video in the series. They create a journal entry. By journal entry, they create bank balances. Big bank balances are used for big ticket items like houses, cars, land, etc., and all the bank loans. So they basically cause the hyperinflation by funding the speculators of the hyperinflation, which were family and friends or connections. And you must know that it is impossible to attack a currency from the outside. It can only be done through the banks, the central bank or the commercial bank. And the Reserve Bank has always got the duty and the ability to stop anybody trying to attack its currency. So we look at all the currencies we've had in this country. None of them were backed by anything. We had the hard tax that was not backed. It was not backed by anything. It was not appropriated. Government simply printed out these hard tokens and gave them freely to the farmers. Ian Smith, when he started the Rhodesia dollar, it was not backed by anything. It was in February of 1970. The British were going to give sanctions on him. He had a war on two of his, with half of the countries that were surrounding him, and he, before he even declared a republic, because he did that in March of 1970, in February 1970, he issued a currency. He did not go to Afro-Exim Bank, he didn't go to Africa Bank, he did not go to the IMF, he didn't go to the World Bank to get backing for his currency before he issued the Rhodesia dollar. And he had war situations and sanctions to deal with. He just went ahead and issued the dollar, and the Rhodesia dollar did not lose a single penny. Also, we get some tidbits from Benjamin Franklin, who wrote a lot about money out of all the founders. He says, as early as 1723, the colony of Pennsylvania showed that it was possible for money to be issued by the government in the place of taxes without causing inflation. Money was printed and circulated there and everywhere. No taxes needed to be collected in Pennsylvania from 1723 to 1750 as a result. But there was still a colony. When the British found out that they were doing this, they stopped them. And then in 1764, you have the Currency Act, or the Coinage Act, which stopped all the colonies from issuing their own money. And during the War of Independence, he's talking about the Continentals on colonial issued money. Benjamin Franklin said, this effect of paper currency is not understood in England. And indeed, the whole is a mystery to the politicians, how we can be able to continue a war for 4 years without money, and how we can pay with paper that has no previous fixed funded appropriated, especially to redeem it. This currency is a wonderful machine. It performs its office when we issue it, and when we are obliged to issue a quantity excessive, it pays itself by depreciation. As Stephen Zarlinger, American Monetary Institute, says that the Continentals won them the country, and the greenbacks let them keep it. All these currencies were issued without the backing of gold, without the backing of anything, not even taxes. Government must issue a currency without delay, then stop the banks from creating money. Put the banks under parliament and give, say, $2,000 to every man, woman, and child on issue of the money. They would do this so that everybody would start on an equal footing. They would do this in Greece, and the Allies did it in as late as I think it was 1848 in West Germany, where they gave 40 Deutschmark, which is well over $1,000 today, to every man, woman, and child, and they also gave two more payments to everybody. They would go door by door and give it to people during the war, and there was no employment. There were basically almost everybody was unemployed at that time in Germany under Allied occupation. So it's been done before, it's been done in contemporary history, and that's what you do when you issue a currency. You want the people to be able to use the currency immediately. The only way they can have the currency is if you give it to them, because the government has the monopoly on the money. They must give it, they must issue it, and the currency should be pegged. When we say the currency should be pegged, we don't want a floating currency. We want it to, because the floating currency is subject to bankers' whims, and there is no theory that describes how currency movements happen with one currency over another. So government must issue a currency without delay. Thank you very much for listening in, and if you have any comments or suggestions, put them